lack nowadays in the globe. So the peace Muslims receive in submitting to Allah. We say Allah, not God, but Allah. So Muhammad, Prophet, peace be upon him, has given a meaning to Muslims' lives. And also he has shaped the world where they live. Because Muhammad, when he received the revelation in 610, and then he moved from Mecca to Medina in 622. So when he moved from Mecca, in Mecca he was doing da'wah, was calling for Islam. And then when he moved to Medina, he had another role, which is a political role, where he reconciled two fighting, conflicting tribes, Al-Aws and Khazraj. And in Islam, there are 1,504 verses that deals with social interaction, mu'amalat, and 135 which deals with ibadat, preaching and how to pray. So more importance is given to the social interaction. I guess according to some recent statistics, 1/5 of the world's people identify themselves as Muslims. And when I talk Muslim, there are different Islams. There is Shia, the Sunni, and the Sufism, and different types of Muslim, because as I mentioned before, that Islam didn't fall on scratch, but fell on cultures. And when the Persian converted into Islam willingly, not unwillingly, not under duress, they brought 12 centuries of civilization. So they also Persianized Islam in the region during the Abbasids. I would like to talk about what is Islam. Islam is an Abrahamic religion. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, received the revelation in 610, as I mentioned before, then another salient event is 622, with the migration of the Prophet to Medina. And another crucial, significant date is 632, the Prophet's death. Because this is a turning point in the history of Islam, where it was led by just a prophet who was being a political and religious leader. Then there are the 4 caliphs that came. And over the caliph or the successor, there was an issue. Who is going to be the successor? Someone from the blood has a bloodline with the prophet, that means from the family. And this is a preaching, he's going to be called Imam. And this is the Shia doctrine with 12 Imams. And those who said that no, he should be elected among Muslims. And this is the Sunnah. And in the Sunnah doctrine, there are 4 schools of interpretation. There is Hanafi, Hanbali, Shafi'i, and Maliki. Morocco is a Maliki, Sunni Maliki, Ash'ari doctrine. Hanafi is in Egypt, Turkey. Hanbali is the most, I would not say radical, but the one that is strict in its interpretations. Shafi'i is different. When he was with the Abbasids, the Abbasids were Sunni, so his interpretations in Baghdad are different to his interpretation in Egypt with the Fatimids, who were Shia. Am I clear now? Please, am I going fast, or it's okay?
It's good. Anyone? Okay.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about... Okay, thank you. Thank you for your patience and for your gentleness. I mean, when I talk about Sharia, which is the halakha, its component, there is the Quran, the Sunnah, the deeds of the Prophet, Hadith, his sayings. And here, when we talk about Hadith, we talk about Sahih, Bukhari, or Muslim. Now, the issue I interrogate as a scholar is how come the Hadith is Sahih, I mean, sound, if it were recorded after 300 years after the death of Muhammad. So the same things. I mean, I'm also interrogating. I'm not doubting, but interrogating the same thing for the Old Testament, which was, I mean, also the New Testament with the. It was written, I mean, for the Old Testament throughout the 1,600. It took a period of time to written. Also, the New Testament was written by the Sahaba I call them Sahaba of the Jesus.
The friends of
Yeah, I would call because they're different, but it's nothing from the revelation. Now, when I talk about the major concepts of Islam, there are four concepts are at the center of Islam. There is Allah, Ummah, the Islamic or the Muslim community, the Quran, the Holy Book, and the Sharia. When I talk about Allah, sorry, okay. Now, when I talk about Allah is the supreme God for Muslims, it is Allah is a supreme God in a world of polytheistic beliefs and practices, and I think Muhammad brought universally applicable monotheistic faith, and it was a way of describing the universal divine power. Okay, unlike because the coming of Muhammad came when the Arabs in Quraysh were pagan and they used to preach statues, Aus and Khajras. Most of them were female. When I talk about the Ummah is a concept that people nowadays, even with some Islam-oriented movements, I don't call them Islamist movements, because when you talk about Islamist, Islamic and Muslim, a Muslim is someone whose creed is Islam, and Islamic is any adjective related to Islam, mainly Islamic history, Islamic art, Islamic architecture, Islamic philosophy. Muslim Islamist is a word that was coined in the West to describe any Muslim who uses Islam as an ideology for political ends. And I'm going to talk about this, about political Islam at the end of my intervention. So although the members come from varied backgrounds and cultures in Islam within this ummah, this is what Benedict called the imagined community, they share beliefs in Allah, the Prophet Muhammad, the 5 pillars of Islam, which are the acknowledgement of the faith, Shahada. There is the prayers 5 times a day. There is fasting for Ramadan. Now we are on the 21st of Ramadan. There is also alms, giving alms, a zakat. And the last one is pilgrimage, going to Mecca. Pilgrimage is not obligatory, only for someone that is able financially and he's in good sound and sane to go to Mecca. So it's not obligatory, only if someone can have the means. Now, when I talk about the Quran is the body of a kind of divine revelations submitted orally to the Prophet. These revelations are codified in the Quran, and the Quran contains around 114 chapters. So they are the essential basis of the Islamic belief. There are different names in the Quran. Most of the names are insects and animals. And the first one is Al-Fatiha, the opening, and the last one is the woman. It was written by his followers after his death, that is the Hadith, during Uthman, the 3rd Caliph, it was codified. By the way, Uthman was the most corrupted person ever when he appointed Muawiyah, and this is the beginning of the Umayyad dynasty. And the Islam that we got up to now is something that was modified by the Abbasids and the Umayyads. By the way, the Umayyad, when they invaded North Africa, or it's called the Maghreb, to spread Islam, they didn't spread Islam. They called them futuhat. They are not in futuhat, but they are invasions. Why? Because at that time, they were the autochthones or the locals were Amazigh. And the Amazigh means Imaziran, which means free people. They out of the different religions, they were pagan, they were before, then they became Jews, then Christians, and they fought this Islam, only they accepted willingly. So the Umayyad said that Islam is for Arabs. The Quran is in Arabic, so it is for the Arabs. The others, in order to survive within the leadership lens under the leadership of Arabs, mainly the Umayyad, should pay dihmi, the people of the book, or others for protection. So the Amazigh in the Maghreb, I mean in Morocco, and the region didn't accept this kind of behavior, demeanor for the Umayyad. So this is only to correct some historical facts that the Umayyad spread Islam. It was down. It is unlike the Old Testament and the Old and New Testament. It is not a narrative account of the Prophet's life or the retelling of his teaching. For example, like in the New Testament. It is Allah's own words, that's what we see, Kalam Allah, that are spoken by, revealed through angel Gabriel. Quran means recitation, to recite. Reciting aloud the poetic language of the Quran remains the most profound or the deepest expression of the faith. So I think in Ramadan, we recite a lot of the Quran and people pray Tarawih. And the Tarawih, sorry again to bring this issue, the Tarawih were not at the time of Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's something, is an invention made by Omar to keep people to secure, because people used to pray in corners and different places of the mosque and different places. So maybe he thought that they were plotting something against him. So he gathered them, all of them, for Tarawih, and the Tarawih used to last for 1 hour, 1 hour and a half. So it was an invention by the times of Omar. So when I talk about Sharia, now I'm gonna move to the Sharia, the Islamic religion and law that governs every aspect of the Muslim life. Sharia is ubiquitous in the Muslim life. So society is based mainly and largely on what we call unwritten rules and tribal and family customs. This is what in the Amazigh, they call it Izrf, which means the customary law that is within the tribe. And for the Amazigh, they split. There is a kind of secularism. There used to be a secularism. There was what we call Amghar. The political leader is in the tribe is called Amghar, the man. And there is the Imam. The Imam deals only with the religious affairs, mainly issues of inheritance and leading the prayers and giving sermons during Eid or giving sermons during the Friday. So despite there is an interaction of the concept of obeying, when I talk of Sharia, a common set of religious law presented sometimes a radical shift, especially with fatwas from radicalization of Islam. That's why in Morocco, we preach a kind of modern Islam, which is Sufism, to spread this the essence of the Islam, which is peace, love, diversity, unity. Despite varying interpretation of some aspects of Sharia, Muslims of all over the world from different backgrounds are united by the following 5 elements of the Islamic faith. Okay, is that okay, Aaron? Am I on time?
Yeah. Maybe let's take a pause. Let's see, because you have only a few minutes. I
have just to explain one aspect, which
Great.
is related.
And then we'll open up for questions. Go ahead.
Okay, there is another aspect which Islam, I think, is different from Christianity in terms of the Islamic eschatology. And I mean, what I mean by eschatology here is a branch of theology which deals with the afterlife and the death. And here there is the day of the judgment. So there is a punishment. In the day of the judgment, there is a prior punishment for the Muslims. And this is an over-interpretation, which is a worldly, human over-interpretation of the day of the judgment. So there is what we call the punishment in the grave or in the tomb. Also, there is the idea of heaven and hell as a punishment. The idea of heaven or Firdaus or Jannah has been mentioned 166 times in the Quran. And its depiction is contradictory to the arid climate of Quraysh, or the region where the revelation is. I think Medina was an oasis. So the depiction was as follows. There are 4 rivers, a river of water, because there is scarcity of water, milk, honey, and wine. Of course, there is what we call depictions of beautiful women as an incentive for males. So the depiction of the paradise or heaven was a patriarchal depiction or description. There is also solace, and what is interesting is that also there is a wall that surrounds Jannah, and there are trees and sands. So before I move to the notion of peace, because in the Jannah people will find peace. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about this. Yes. Any questions? I would like some comments or some some ideas that can help me understand more. And I would like you, please, if you can find some similarities, and we can celebrate these similarities, as well as that we can reconcile the differences. And here we are to share and not to argue. Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much, Dries. First of all, just the word you used, Jannah, actually it's Gan. It's Gan Eden. Okay, it's the same word for us and for you.
Is it worldly? Is it worldly or is it celestial? What's the depiction of Jannah in Judaism? I would like to know. I know some shreds, but I would like to hear from our rabbis and from our scholars.
Great. So I don't want to take too much time. I want to open up for any comments, questions. I mean, I have many questions of my own, even though I talked to Dries many times. But let's open up for questions. Anything you want to ask? Yeah, Yaakov. Love Yaakov.
I thank you so much for that. I feel always guilty. I'm just jumping in with questions, but it's question time and I have one. I'm going to ask a similar question of you as I did to the representative of, I guess, a branch of Christianity who was speaking with us. I'm always fascinated to know how a Muslim of one particular sect would relate to or consider a Muslim of a completely different kind of sect. Here in Islam, it's, I guess, an even more specific question because of the notion of ummah. So you're all sort of part of one entity. But by the same token, I would imagine that there are some significant differences. I'm curious about that.
That's an amazing, interesting question. I mean, this is to the point. Thank you so much for your question. I've heard many Muslims, and I said at the beginning, I started with this quote. I said that Islam didn't fall on scratch; it fell on cultures that shaped the way of understanding. That's number one. Number two, the split over the caliphate. I mean, between Shia and the Sunnah. And in the Sunnah, you have different schools of interpretations. In the Shia, you have different schools of interpretation, 12 imams, and each one is brilliant. You have the Alawites, you have you have different branches of Islam, their own understanding of Islam, the Baha'i as well. So there are different realities within the same. They preach the kind of ummah as Muslims only in moments of threat towards the Islam. But when it is in moment of reflection, of silence, each one, and this is the problem with unity. I mean, people always say, La ilaha illallah, it's okay, but not your version or your way of understanding Islam is the best. There is no best. We seek the richness of the meaning rather than the clarity of the meaning. Who is wrong and who is right? No, we can reconcile our differences and we can celebrate our similarities. And this is the problem. This is the notion of peace. Peace not only towards other people from other faiths, but within Al-Ummah. You can find now the problems all over the world. You find the Shia are always trying to create chaos in Sunni countries. And I think and within the Sunni, even for example, when you go to a mosque, there are different people that have been taught in different schools. So even the way they pray is different. Sometimes they want to say, oh yeah, they look at the next person next to and say, please, this is not the way we should pray. You have to pray this way. You have to pray that way. So people want, this is what you call, they want to hegemonize. I think Islam is more about spirituality rather than religiosity. In other words, you can connect to Allah, respect the others, respect the thresholds. And this is something we have to work on. And I think with Harun, we have been discussing about the blessing of Allah towards us human beings to reconcile our differences and celebrate our similarities. So I agree with you. And I think in Judaism also, you have the Orthodox, you have the secular, you have the traditional. So you have different people, even they say ummah within Israel, within Zionism, but when it comes to interpretations, or for example, like the great rabbi of Haifa, Yusuf Bashash, when he was in Morocco, when he was in Morocco, he was, before he went to Tlemcen, he was the rabbi of Tlemcen. He was, by the way, a native of my city, which is Meknes. So he was the first guy who tried to put the halacha and the context and draw a triangle and look for the golden mean. For example, when he said it in one of his, he said people when they used to live in the east of Morocco, they used to wear a scarf, the Jew. And when they moved to Casablanca, which is a colonial city, and there's modernity, so women used to remove their scarf. So he had an issue. He said, okay, the halacha is conditioned by the context. There will be kind of ijtihad, which we call reasoning. And he did a lot of ijtihad, especially for the candle. He asked for, there is no harm in using the the electric candle. These are the things that he talked about. So when you talk about the concept of ummah, it looks great, gorgeous, but when you go deep inside the society and the dynamics of power, identity, then you'll find different issues. And I think even in the we can find. Thank you. Did I, Huda? Did I answer? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question, Professor Dries, from Huda?
Okay, because now it's 7:30. I still have 10 minutes, and then.
Okay, so Huda, let's do a quick question, and
yeah,
we can always meet again. But let's give it a let's take this one.
Okay, my father, I believe, once told me about a tradition in the Hadith that Muhammad was commanded to establish 50 prayers a day, and on his way to passing along the tradition to Muslims, he met Moses, who convinced him to try to lobby God to bring it down to 5. I found that story very striking for 2 reasons. First of all, because it seems similar to the story of God telling Abraham he's going to destroy Sodom, and Abraham lobbies God down to, well, if he starts out with, if there are 50 righteous people in the city, and then he lobbies him down to 5. But it also sort of reminded me that the challenges that I have, and that I know a lot of my fellow Jews have with having kavanah, proper intention in prayer, is maybe not unique to us. I'm just curious what Islam does to keep prayer fresh when you're praying 5 times a day.
That's a really very interesting question, and I think this is not what Islam says, but what people do with Islam, not what Islam, because people can have over interpretations. I've heard these stories again, and whenever I hear someone telling me that there is hadith, I tell them, please, hadith for both of the famous gatherers of hadith, al-Bukhari and Muslim, were not Arabs, and they were Persian. So to how versed they were in Arabic to collect all these hadiths. And according to studies, they said that Bukhari got about 1,846 hadith. Only 186 were turned to be sahih.
Oh, wow.
So,
and I heard this wasn't one of them.
Okay, so this idea, of clemence of Allah towards towards Muslims or people to preach about having a long times of prayers and 5, I think it's debatable, and I think I have to do a lot of research, and I try to interrogate and to do some research, but I didn't find any answer that quench, or any narrative that quench my academic sapience or cognizance in order to validate these kind of hadiths. That's why in my interpretations, my readings, I always try to avoid hadiths. And also when someone brings a verse, I always ask about the context of revelation, asbab al-nuzul, because there is Mecca, because Quran was not one block. It was just verses, and verses in Mecca and Medina. In Mecca, they were more about ibadat. But when it moves to Mecca, with the context of conflicts and many issues, social issues, political issues, economic issues, there was called a kind of al-mu'amalat, the social interaction. So
is there now I hear that, I hear. So I'm not going to take this as divine, necessarily divine truth, but
no.
but is there one sort of technique that that Muslims have used to keep their prayers fresh that has spoken to you, or that you've seen has worked for people?
What do you mean by fresh, please?
What I mean by fresh is when I brush my teeth twice a day and I pray 3 times a day. And unfortunately, I very often do both mindlessly. And it doesn't bother me that I brush my teeth mindlessly, but it bothers me that I pray mindlessly. So, right, if you pray 5 times a day and more so, I would imagine that would be a problem.
Yeah. They are spaced out, by the way. The first prayer is al-Fajr, I mean, early in the morning, okay, at the dawn. And the second one is going to be al-Dhuhr, midday. So I think between you have, I mean, drank a lot of water and you have eaten. So I think maybe you have released some gases. So when you release a gas or you go satisfies nature's call, you have to do the ablution. I mean, you have to keep yourself clean. Now, there is an issue. Sometimes when there is scarcity of water, you can resort to what we call to tayammum. A tayammum that you can touch a stone or touch something. But when, for example, if you have a sexual intercourse, you have to do I mean, you have to shower and the whole body clean showering. So it's very difficult to sustain. Maybe between 2 prayers which are close, maybe al-Maghrib and Isha, it's possible because they close 1 hour. But for the others, it's impossible because you can release gases, you can go satisfy nature's call, pee, or others. So you have to renew the ablution. So I think, but people get used to. I mean, it's not, because sometimes Islam, وَيُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. I mean, Allah wants your yusra, that means moderation, rather than doing things and the dura. So you can be flexible. If you are on a trip, and on a trip for 3 days, you can pray with taqsir. I mean, you can shorten. So there are
wow, cool.
And
if there's something very similar in the Talmud. And is there always, does it always have to miss
his prayer? So let's keep it short because he has a prayer to go to. So I just want to make sure he makes it on time.
All right. Okay. I'll let you go back to talking to the group. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a million for your interaction. I mean, I wish we were in person in order to share more, and it should be longer. And 1 hour, as I told you, 25, 35 minutes is not that enough. I mean, to talk about the essence of our beloved religions or religion.
Agreed.
Now, if I have to move to the second part, which is the notion of peace, and this is it goes with the Sulh al-Hudaybiyah. Do you remember the Treaty of Hudaybiyah? It was on the 6th year of the Hijrah. But later on, just to let the people go for pilgrimage, but the Quraysh didn't want to accept people, so they broke the treaty. So treaties are always, this is a human nature, that the treaties have been always violated. And the second one was the invasion not the invasion, Ghazwat. There's a Ghazwa led by the Prophet I think in the 8th. The 8th year, and they invaded Kaaba, Mecca. And one of the things that the Prophet Muhammad said, that please, anyone who get into the Muawiyah's, not Muawiyah, but Uthman's house is safe, because he was one of the nobles. And the second thing, he told them that he ordered that they should destroy all the statues except one statue in the Kaaba. Guess which one? Is the statue of Mary. Okay, so and since then there is what we call, after the notion of peace, preaching the peace. And one of the things that were mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, the cow, verse 126, he said that the city of Islam is called the city of Aman. Aman means peace. And he said, and remember, Abraham said, my Lord, make this city of peace. So whoever enters Mecca, the city of Islam, attains a kind of Aman. And I think on Surah Al-Umran, or the house of Umran, verse 97, he said that whoever enters it maintains or attains a kind of peace. So peace is salam or silm, and is one of the most beautiful names of Allah, or the divine names, and there are about 99, which means the source or the spring of peace. Allah himself is being a source of peace that guides his man or people to the ways of peace and safety. And there is a verse in the Quran, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, the table, verse 16, where with Allah guide thee all who seek his goods, his good pleasure, to ways of peace and safety. So safety and peace are the core of many verses in the Quran. And the salam, which is peace and safety, will be their greetings therein. This is Surah Yunus, chapter Yunus, verse number 10. Now, since Islam stands for peace, peacekeeping, as its basic guidelines or purpose, or telos. Telos in Greek means attendant purpose. Salam and silm is a difference. Thus signify the Islamic mission of peace, which is against what we call jihad. Jihad is a word that has been mentioned 4 times in the Quran, but with different meanings. Okay. Now, there is another concept when there is war, and I think at the moment, the times of the Abbasids and Umayyad, there was Dar Salam and Dar Harb, the war, the house of the war and the house of the sin. So the only way to bring salam, peace, there is what we call sulh. Sulh is to end the war, the end of a war. And it is particularly used to a sense to end hatred. And I think in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 224, Allah said, you should not make Allah's name an excuse against making peace among mankind. Also in the Surah Al-Hujurat, the private rooms, verse number 10, so make peace and reconciliation between you two contending brothers. So we are brothers, we are cousins, so we have to make peace. There is nothing about violence in Islam. Only people use it. And I think one of the most salient, important verses in the Quran, which is in Surah Al-Hujurat, the rooms, O people, verse number 13, O people, we created you from a single pair of male and female, and we have made you into nations and tribes in order that you may know one another, not despise each other. The most honored amongst you, you are those most righteous in conduct. وإن أتقاكم عند الله وإن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. At first, if you look at the principles approach towards Islamic peacekeeping, is the focus on the Quran, on the prophetic tradition, and I take it with Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, before starting the war, the last sermon, his last visit, and the life of the Prophet, I mean the Sunnah, of course, of the Prophet and his companion, including women, Aisha and Khadija. So very salient role that women played. So Islam didn't issue the role of women. Now, when we talk about Islamic peacekeeping in Maqasid Sharia, the intents of the Sharia or the jurisprudence, the Islamic peacekeeping approaches within Islam has been for a long period recognized within Muslim communities as powerful means or tool or vehicle through which to promote dialogue. I think the Prophet Muhammad had treaties with the Christians, 6 treaties, non-violence, peace building, and conflict resolution. When we talk about Maqasid Sharia, and here the foundational intents of the values and purposes and the objectives or telos of the law of Islam. So Maqasid Sharia is not just another school of thought. No, it is a fountainhead for contextual interpretations for the schools of thoughts, wherever they are found. So they are the basics. They are the cornerstones for any contextual interpretation. That's why we talked about the context of revelation. So the Maqasid Sharia, therefore, helps to both frame and give a kind of further concrete expression to the 7 principles, and there are 7. So the Maqasid Sharia, they act like a glue to cement the 7 principles, and that encompass different Sharia and Muslim schools of juridic schools. And I would like to start with these principles. The first one is unity. The idea that God is one, a tawheed. There is also peace, the name of faith, as-salam, which constitutes the key greetings, salamu alaikum. Diversity, and here I go back to your your question of community and different schools of interpretation. So diversity of people and opinion, which is called al-ikhtilaf. There is ikhtilaf, but we have to deal with it into a kind of dialogue. What is a dialogue? Is to keep your opinion pending and listen to the others. Listen to the other in order to understand, not to respond. It is regarded a kind of blessing rather than a negative characteristic, which is diversity. Also, there is what we call justice, is one of Maqasid Sharia, both intrinsic or negotiable, to bearing witness for God, which means al-qist wal-adl in Arabic. It is comprehensive and non-discriminatory, akin to Western notions of fairness and equity. There's also mercy, which is one of the names of Allah, the merciful. Is the primary attribute to Allah. It is a critical mission of the Prophet, which is ar-Rahma. Ar-Rahma. There is also dignity. When I talk about dignity, there is a salient work by a Moroccan philosopher who's called Muhammad Aziz al-Hababi, when he talked about the Muslim personalism. And he said that we are all individuals, and what makes a person with an individual, a person, personality is dignity. So dignity is a core ingredient in the human construction. It constitutes the karama, and the dignity of the soul. Number 7 is what we call moderation, and it's one of the Greek virtues. Moderation, it means the balance, being centered in default of the Muslim, because the Ummah is described as moderate. Al-wasatiyya means al-wasat. Now, if we talk about peace, I would say that the quest for peace occupies a very salient, a central point or place within the Islam, and constitutes a very essence of the cracks of the Islamic ecosystem of peace building. I don't have time because now there is a call for prayers. I wish I had more times, but I have the pursuit of peace under Islam is a collective responsibility. It is why the Quran instructs in one of the chapters, Al-Anfal, spoils, and he said, if the enemy is inclined towards peace, make peace with them and put your trust in Allah. Indeed, He alone is all hearing, all knowing. Diversity here, accepting the other. And I think Allah in the Quran said in Isra, Surah Al-Isra, the journey, chapter Surah journey, 70, verse 70, he said, verily we have honored the child of Adam, affirming that all humans, irrespective of gender, regardless of gender, race, religion, socio-economic status, are inherently honored and dignified. I would like to go straight to a salient issue, which is the true meaning of jihad. The true meaning of jihad deals with the struggle for the self. That's the main self-improvement, not jihad fighting the other. In other words, it's one of the main ways or tools used by Muslims to settle internal and external differences. And in the Quran, in Surah Al-Layl, the night, verse 190, the Quran said, let there be no compulsion in religion, no ikraha fi din, in Surah Al-Baqarah. And also God said, God does not love aggressors. So jihad in the Quran constantly used to define as the overall religious struggle, personal purification or purgation or catharsis, and collective efforts to establish Islamic. So when we talk about, I have some time. Do I have some time, please? 2 minutes?
Yeah. If it's up to you. I mean, I feel uncomfortable that we kept you from going to prayer, but if you have more time, yeah.
Yeah,
We have.
I have maximum 5 minutes and then I go because the mosque is just close to me. Okay, I got just 5 minutes. Okay, so Islam is against violence and wars. And in the Quran, there is a saying, there is a verse that says, whoever kills a person, not for a murder or spreading mischief in the land, this is as if he had killed all the people. In the Holy Quran, Almighty also declared, call unto the war, the Lord with wisdom, fair exhaustion, reason with them is better way. And also in the Quran, say, you have your ways and I have my ways. Lakum dinukum waliyadin. That means you should not, this is, you have your own way and I have my own way. Now, I wanted to talk about political Islam. So this is a kind of Western labeling. And there are movements that were burgeoning in the 60s as reaction to three main things. Political Islam has three articulations of the existence. There is a kind of reaction to, as a response to the colonialism, as a reaction to the post-colonial regimes, and also it was engaged with the multiple aspects of globalization. So political Islam was used, seek to validate or vindicate social equity, justice, democracy, fighting marginalization. So Islamism is used from the top down in order to keep the status quo, or from bottom up to seek change. I wish I had more time. They're colleagues, brothers, and cousins. And I wish we have another time when I can expand more and I can have a talk for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, or maybe 3 days meetings or forum. I think, Harun, now it's your responsibility to...
First of all, thank you so much, Dries. I have to say, there's the word sabil in the Quran, which means like a fountain that's like Zamzam, that flows. And in Hebrew we have this phrase kamayana novea. So we felt like you were like a spring, like you brought up more and more ideas. Unpacking each one of them could take us a year. That's the verse that you brought. This appears also in the Mishnah. Sanhedrin chapter 4, Mishnah, the first Mishnah there. So we have those very similar ideas, and there's a lot more to say, but I want to release you to go to your prayer. Thank you so much. And this is not the last time we meet, inshallah. We'll meet both in Morocco and both online, and we'll continue those discussions.
Inshallah. So have a peaceful night, all of you, and I hope that peace will, you and yours are safe, and peace will reign and be overwhelm our world. Thank you, and have a good time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Idris. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so we have our next guest here. I would like to take the opportunity that you're here and actually hear from you, because that's, but if it's okay, let's take 5 minutes just to unpack and process a little bit what we just heard. See if people have any questions, comments. I did want to get also to some internal Quran study. We'll just do it next time. Specifically, there's a specific chapter I want to go over with you, but this can wait for next week. Let's open up the floor for a minute. We just heard a lot, really, literally a lot in 45 minutes. And now it's our safe space. It's our group. Ari is a dear colleague. You can treat him as one of the part of the gang. Any thoughts, comments, feedback, reactions that come to mind?
That was a lot to absorb in the period. I'm trying to absorb it all. It was very interesting.
Okay, but it's all recorded and it's transcribed. You can also look at it later. How does this relate to the concept of Islam you had until now? Like, how do you, any concept you had?
Abu Kamayhu, the Ummah. I mean, I just think that the question that I asked, I thought was pointing to this point, that what I think to the majority of Muslims, he would not be considered a Muslim. meaning, the interpretations are so deep and they're so definitive that it's just like I didn't have the sense that I was meeting with an authentic representative of the religion with which we have an issue, or have issues. Like I could be boys with that guy forever, and I'm sure that we would pray together and do iftar together and do a Pesach Seder together. But that's not, and I just don't feel like that's an encounter with, a representative voice of an adversarial kind of concept. He's a Sufi, so that's my
Yeah.
my.
Well, no, we're taking it slowly. Next, we're going to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood and Sayyid Qutb, and then we'll see what hardline Islamism looks like. Yeah, however, I do have to say, let's say, at least in the Moroccan context, I mean, Sufism is not a small stream. It's actually pretty big. It's just not organized. And actually, in Morocco, it's now becoming adopted as sort of like the official stream by the king, because he sees that as a tool to counterbalance the radicals. So, but yes, of course, I mean, again, JIC is a philosopher. He wrote like 5 books. He's a professor. Most Muslims are not that educated about the Quran as he is. So obviously, he's not a representative. He's not just a guy from the street. But he's also not just an outlier like from nowhere. There is a school of thought that's in that direction. Okay, let's take one more comment or thought.
The jihad.
Yeah.
Yeah. That.
The concept of jihad is an internal. It's not the jihad al-nafs, like the jihad of the soul.
Yeah.
But actually, if you look at researchers, some would say that this concept is much later and not really part of Islam. But again, those debates become very similar to our debates. Who invented the concept of that tefillah or simcha or whatever, at what time, what point in Jewish history, and what is authentic Judaism is also it's a tough question.
Who can define what is authentic Islam better than an authentic scholar of Islam? I mean, it reminds me of when George W. Bush kept on saying that Islam is a religion of peace, as if he has the authority to define what Islam is.
Right. I think he said some very important, two very important things that I will hand over to Ari. One is that there is Islam in of itself, and there's what Muslims do with that, and that's where it gets very, very diverse. And also, if we go back to what he said in the beginning, Islam actually evolved by piggybacking on other cultures. So the Arabic Islam, actually most Muslims are not Arab today. So when Islam encountered the Persians, when it encountered the Amazigh, when it encountered southern Spain, it got different shapes and forms. That's why you have so many dialects of Arabic, because they merged with local languages. And the Arabic that he speaks, I mean, he speaks also Fusha, which is like the standard Arabic. But Arabic he speaks in Morocco is not understandable to Arabs here in Jordan or Egypt or the Emirates. It's not the same language. It's similar, but it's not the same. So that's part of the reason for the huge diversity in Islam, which makes, and with this I want to hand over to Ari, which makes our relationship as a very tiny people, but still very diverse in of itself, with this huge nation or Ummah of 1.2 billion people. And I just saw in the chat that Sufis alone are like 300 million. Again, that's like 20 times more than the Jewish people. The Ahmadiyya, which is a small stream, very peaceful, very Israel loving and all that. It's a small stream, it's 20 million. Okay, it's bigger than the Jewish people. So these are numbers that we cannot even understand. And they're like all over the world, and they're like 180 countries. Like they're huge. Again, in Islam they're small, but so Ari is a very dear friend. He has a PhD in Islamic studies. He wrote a book about the Qibla. Speaks Arabic. A very dear friend, and he's in the international department of AJC, the American Jewish Committee, which we also mentioned in the past. We remember when we talked about Nostra Aetate and AJC played in that between Jews and the Catholic Church. So Ari is in that. I mean, he wasn't there yet. Neither me. We're the same age, but he's in the department that did that, and he's in charge of relationship with the Muslim world. And let's hear from you first a little bit about AJC, the organization, and then want to understand like a snapshot of Jewish-Muslim relations right now. By and large, it's changing every minute with this war in Iran and all that. But whatever we can get now. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Aharon Ariel. I'm also glad I got to be there for that teaching session. Very special man, clearly. It's amazing to be with this group, some very familiar faces and some new ones. I think that the program, the endeavor that you're engaged in is incredibly important. And it's something that our world needs because the work of whatever we call it, reconciliation, bridge building, Muslim-Jewish transformation, is not something that can be in just the hands of a couple of people. We need a whole of society approach, and the positions that all of you sit in, I see the bios, are really where transformation needs to happen in all of those places. And that's a lot of what we talk about at American Jewish Committee, where I work as Director of Muslim-Jewish Relations. We talk about the transformation of Muslim-Jewish relations in the 21st century, analogous to what we saw and helped contribute to for Christian-Jewish relations in the 20th. It's more complex than that. It's not as simple and easy, but this is one of the missions of our interreligious affairs today. And part of why I say that the transformation of Muslim-Jewish relations in the 21st century, it has a lot built into it that I'll go into for a moment. But let me say a word about AJC. Some of you know it, perhaps some don't. We're in our Shana Mea Ve'esrim, our 120th year, founded in 1906 by a small group of German American Jews. That's where the word committee comes in, and American and Jewish. Seeing the plight of fellow Jews overseas, seeing their place in American society growing and saying, maybe we can intervene to do something about it. And from that committee of 9 or 12, today we're about 25 offices in the United States, another 15 posts and offices in other cities around the world, including Jerusalem, Abu Dhabi, Johannesburg, Mumbai, plenty of European capitals, Berlin, Paris, Brussels, Rome. Okay, I'll stop. Not yet in Manado or Jakarta, but maybe one day. And the work of AJC is we're not an interfaith organization. We're an advocacy and diplomacy organization on behalf of the Jewish people. And we have an interfaith department. Interreligious diplomacy is one of the avenues through which we do this work. And what I would say, and I guess today I'm going to give maybe one big abstract concept, a couple of thoughts, insights, and a few specific tools for the tool belt. Hopefully we'll do that in 5 or 6 or 8 minutes, and then we can talk. But the work we do is here in the United States with a broad network in different cities around the country. In other parts of the world, we connect to religious leaders at some of the highest levels and also some civil society folks on the ground. Some of it is academic, some of it is government related, but certainly in Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Morocco, Egypt, Indonesia, and other countries, we are building this connective tissue. AJC has 3 pillars of our work. One is supporting Israel's quest for security and peace in the region, combating anti-Semitism in all its forms so that Jewish communities around the world can flourish, and supporting the growth of democratic values, human rights, and pluralism as both Jewish values and integral to a healthy social fabric of our world. So whenever we do this work and come into a room, it's with those goals in mind and not one to the exclusion of others. So the big concept I want to say when I think about Muslim-Jewish relations, because my academic study, including with Rabbi Yehuda's father, who's one of my rebbes here in this field, is if we look at the history of Muslim-Jewish relations, and I'm glad you're studying a lot of this, there's debates about whether we should read what's happening today through the lens of the Golden Age narrative or what some call the lachrymose conception of Jewish history narrative. Do I take all of those points of conflict and negative teachings and weaponization of texts from the past, and that's how I understand today? Or do I take the episodes of flourishing, mutual learning, cooperation, and relative harmony and read today through that lens? My opinion is that looking back at the past is a poor way to understand what's there today or to fix the future. We can learn a tremendous amount from the past. We can point to episodes when we want to say certain things in the future. We're a people that looks backwards towards tradition. And so we must study and understand and extract from it, but trying to map the past onto the present and the future is a mistake for many reasons. We may be entering a new chapter of Muslim-Jewish history, and we should do that in light of the history that came before, but it is not predetermined what's going to happen next. And right now we're in a moment of particular tension and conflict, but also incredible opportunity. We haven't had Muslims and Jews living side by side in centuries in the way they do in Israel, the United States, in Europe, and some other parts of the world too. We haven't had the ecosystem of Muslim-Jewish programs, study, even though it may be a drop in the bucket of the 1.8 or 2 billion people, and even in our own community, how many are open to studying and understanding as you are? It may be small, but it's new. We haven't had opportunities like this for a long time. And so when I talk about the transformation of Muslim-Jewish relations in the 21st century, I think about the metaphor of a river changing its course. Right now, the default of many people in both communities is not towards mutual respect, appreciation, cooperation, any of that. The default is towards suspicion and other things. And we're trying to shift the course of that river. And if I live in New York City, and not too far from the Hudson River, if I look at that, I think it's impossible to change directions. But it's not. And how do you do that? Well, if I did it with a spoon, I probably would never get done. I'm not Andy Dufresne in Shawshank Prison. But maybe if some people bring a spoon, others bring a spade, we get some heavy machinery, over time, something can shift. I think sending Ramadan greetings to your neighbor, maybe that's a spoon. Some of the great conferences and programs that Rav Yaakov and Rav Aharon Ariel are doing, maybe that's a big shovel or bigger. The Abraham Accords, that's heavy machinery. But if we think about it as an ecosystem and people being part of a collective effort to shift the narratives, shift the default, because most people don't wake up in the morning, read a text, study all the depths of what Muslims and Jews say about each other and all these things, and then make a decision. They go with the flow of culture, and that's some of what we're trying to shift. So now my two insights. That's the big idea. One is we talk about an ecosystem, and notice I didn't say the way to reconciliation is theological. The way to reconciliation is political. It's cultural exchange, it's education, it's solidarity. No, it's all of those things. We have an ecosystem of relationships here, and everyone really should find their place in it, I think. So I love that the Jerusalem Interfaith Center or Torah Interfaith Center is taking such strong strides in theological advancement. We don't have a lot of places that are doing that. AJC, which is an advocacy organization, a lot of what we do, at least here in the United States, is Muslims and Jews building coalition to strengthen hate crimes legislation, protect houses of worship, and religious freedom. If we came in as an advocacy organization with Israel policies as part of what we do and said, let's talk about theology, we wouldn't necessarily go very far. We do talk about theology. We do engage in dialogue. But there are those who are skeptical that say, well, you're talking about this, but you really are about that. We know what our tools are. So one thing, and we can talk about it, is find your place in the ecosystem, because trust gets fed and built in different ways. The other is, that's the transformation. The transformation takes a long time. I said in the 21st century, I see Professor Dina Grant. You've got lots of graduate students. I remember being a student myself. I love deadlines that are off in the future. 100 years, the 21st century, the end of that is a long way away. Ha, 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 ha. No, but what I mean is that we have to have patience. And the way that we measure progress isn't just, is it always going forward? This isn't a straight line. If you came to me in September of 2023, I would have told you about the American Jewish Committee giving our Human Dignity Award to the highest religious authority of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya, a person who's at the center of a global network of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of scholars who are poising themselves against extremism, towards acceptance of the religious freedom of minorities in Muslim countries, and building an Islamic basis for that. And we had an event with a couple hundred people, Muslims, Jews, others, diplomats. October 7th changed some of that. The relationships are still there. I had the blessing of being with him last month in a private way. So it's not always a straight line. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind also. And so part of that is don't get discouraged. If you had a relationship with your local imam or partner and you haven't talked in a while, well, maybe you should also find new partners. Maybe you should reach out again. You tried something, it didn't work. You try something else. You take a break if you need to tap out. You come back in onto the mat. This is long distance running, and it requires resilience. And so we each have to ask, what is it that causes me resilience? And then, coming down, if the first one is 50,000 feet and that's 10,000 feet, a couple of things I always think are helpful, just little tools. It's not the whole toolbox. You all probably have some tools in your toolbox that I would like to learn from. But a couple things I think about is, one, don't underestimate the power of small outreach and small acts of allyship. If you're living in a neighborhood, not in a Muslim majority country, but in a minority country where Muslims have been attacked, the mosque got graffiti or firebombed, an elected official said Muslims are not welcome in this country, as we've seen in America happening in the last month or two, 4 or 5 members of Congress in just the last month. Say something, reach out, see how they're doing. You can do it in a personal way, you can do it in a public way, and you shouldn't underestimate how much that's needed for people not to feel alone. Probably you can appreciate it where if you ever got outreach from someone after the 7th, after one of the shootings that we've seen, murders, anti-Semitic murders in just the last 6 months, it goes a long way for building trust. Even a Ramadan greeting and a blessing without any kind of thing, these little things matter. And we want to create a culture where that is the norm. The second thing is, if you're in a room, this is something I appreciate about Aharon Ariel and Rav Yaakov and some others that I've seen. If you're in a space where you have the opportunity to encounter a religious leader, of course, being there and leaving with good feelings is important. Of course, a positive interaction is the creation of peace itself. But also, know your ask. Know what is your responsibility. If you have the gift and the blessing of being in that kind of encounter with someone, what is demanded of you? Maybe it's an ask for a program. You don't want to push the boundary so much that you don't get the next meeting, but you also don't want to check parts of yourself at the door. Maybe in some meetings, it's okay to highlight the Jewish component of your identity and not to feature all of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict pieces. But maybe there's a place where at least being able to say what that land or the people living there mean for who you are as a Jew is something you can say, even though it may not be expected. And so I think when you're in the room, pausing beforehand, because it's easy to be starstruck and to have some euphoria, which is appropriate because we're doing this very cool thing, but also pausing and saying, if I'm here, what is my representational work? And then the third thing, which I'm seeing even in the questions and discussions here is, man, you got to keep learning. The Muslim world is so incredibly diverse. It's, not just are most Muslims not Arab, as though Arab Muslim was one identity, as though Muslims in Lebanon and Egypt and North Africa and Kuwait and Saudi Arabia are all somehow the same. And in Gaza and Jordan or whatever, right? But there's so much, so much. When we think about, I see when we think about this, it's not just ethnic, national, and geographic diversity, but yes, and Sunni, Shia, which some say is denominational, or Sufi, which has to do with a mystical orientation, or schools of law. But I think what the professor said, which is really important to understand, is that we can't rarefy Islamic identities so that they are expressions that are just captured in books and schools of thought. Every religion is a culture, and Islamic art and Islamic foods and greetings and ways of being and language may also have as much impact as knowing whether this text, or maybe sometimes more than whether this text is interpreted by this person in this way, because a lot of people don't have exposure to that at all. And so for you, it's impossible for any of us to know everything, but it's not impossible to get to develop a working knowledge. And to do it, you have to kind of build your cubby holes, start filling them, and then you change them as you learn a new piece of information and you fill them again. And I think a part of the program that you're here is building out the cubbies, filling them, and developing this sense of thought. I think this is a great program. We only have a little bit of time, but I want you all to see it as an invitation to connect and do more.
Right. Okay, Ari, thank you so much. I love the river metaphor. I'm going to use it with your permission. Moving forward, let's open up for questions, comments, thoughts about AJC, about what Ari just told us. I have my own questions, but as usual, I want to open the floor for the group first. Don't be shy.
Well, I'll ask if no one has a question. I'll ask, when you think about your stakeholders, whoever that is, your community, your congregation, if you ask them, tell me something about the Islamic religion or Quran. I mean, do they know anything at all? Is it any verses? Like I sometimes say to Muslim partners, my community only knows 2 or 3 verses, and you know which ones they are, and you need to show up to be able to help us. So, like, what does that look like in your communities, and what does it mean for them that you're engaging in this? Yeah, Amalia, please, and please accept that I'm going to use some of the first names you have here, and with due reverence to all degrees and clergy. You don't need to call me doctor. Please don't.
To respond to your question, and I had one actually for you, but my response will be brief. My community knows so little, and there is kind of a reduction of the great diversity into a few pretty deprecating perspectives. I wanted to ask you regarding AJC, if you could elaborate on the third pillar a little more, the supporting of democratic values, what that looks like, and where most of that is happening. Is that largely a US based piece, or is that also abroad?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. I also think on something that you said about where some of the communities are. There's also, like I talked about, the defaults. Very often, even if we point to some of these larger initiatives or people that we meet or things that are going on, the default says, yeah, but that's the exception. Yeah, but that's not important. Yeah, that's just ceremonial. Yeah, that's outward facing. And I think it's worth knowing the history of what's been done, because if you say enough of these things, sometimes it actually, what do they say in some big corporations, a billion here, a billion there, pretty soon it starts to add up. That when American Jewish Committee in 2020 did a joint mission to Auschwitz with the head of the Muslim World League, the global Islamic body based in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, we had major questions about it because that body has some challenges in the past. We can get into that because the country is on was 2020 was still even earlier in its journey than it is now. And you want to support good actors and not get used as an implement for someone else's thing. But we also have to be pragmatic. We know that there's trust and transaction, and trust is really needs to be deep. And of course, people are getting something out of it even as they're feeding their values. And so the fact that, for example, there, it wasn't just Western language media that was there, but he brought Al Arabiya TV, that he was getting death threats, that he brought a delegation of high level Muslim officials with him. Look, I think even the photo going through the Arbeit macht frei gate got him a lot of hate. But the fact that this was something where social risk was being taken is something that is significant and worth looking at. And some of the actions that have happened since then for that figure is really important. Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya, who I mentioned before, the author of the Marrakesh Declaration, giving religious Islamic grounding to religious freedom for minorities in Muslim majority countries. It's a big deal. The Grand Imam of Indonesia, who gets a couple 100,000 people in his mosque on a Friday, who's now the Minister of Religious Affairs of that country, coming in the midst of the war for a 6-week fellowship studying Judaism and interreligious dialogue with us at AJC and at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and doing that publicly. Again, we can ask, have they done everything? They're not speaking on the stage at the APAC convention, if that's what some people are expecting. Right, and I see the smiles because this group appreciates it's not a straight line, it's a long process. Not that that's our goal. I see we're recording and we have a lot of AIs. Let's be clear,
that's
that's
for
not my
internal use. Don't
goal.
worry.
That's not my goal with any of this. But it's not just the little spoons that are moving the river, is the point. And it's worth studying and knowing the work that's been happening. And like I said, the work of Aharon Ariel, or that Dina Grant is doing at Hartford Seminary, or others on this call as well. In terms of like, where does the human rights fit in? For AJC, we do have a Human Rights Institute, the Jacob Blaustein Institute, JBI, for the advancement of human rights. They do a lot of work in countries. A lot of our engagement as an American organization has to do with democratic values in our communications department when we call out hate against other groups, or if we express concern about different actions that might be taken. It's there, but I will tell you this idea of, right, I said trust and transaction, or values-driven work and transaction, principled pragmatism, enlightened self-interest. These are tools that are part of the stock in trade of Jewish advocacy groups. We might have very strong feelings about criminal justice reform and environmental concerns. And a lot of our people will be active in various spaces that are outside of the Jewish advocacy space in their other side, but like we know our lane. So most often it's when we can align interests and messages, but there are some parts that are purely, for the sake of other. But if you're interested, the JBI program is really good to know about.
I see Huda raised his hand. We have only 8 minutes, and I also have one question, but you go
Yeah, and
first.
I'll shorten. I'll compress.
Yeah.
But I was asked to do an infomercial for AJC, and I feel like I could get fired if I didn't go on and on about it. So
Yeah, go ahead, Huda.
So similar experience to Amalia that with my community, there's very, very little understanding. I think with the religious leaders of the community, they're a step ahead in terms of being at least neutral. And I say that knowing that I was a rabbi in an extremely small c conservative community. I'm on a 5 towns far Rockaway rabbi chat, not the not the bastions of liberal Judaism, and a question came up about several mosques that are popping up, and somebody was saying one of the rabbis was saying a congregant of his was encouraging him to see what can be done so that there aren't so many of these mosques. And there was not one rabbi on that chat who thought it was a good idea to oppose.
Yeah.
And I was happy about that, but that's all you have is basically silence. And what that translates into for people is ignorance, because people aren't talking about it. Yeah. And I went once with a friend of mine to just a long time ago to do work in Greece during the Syrian civil war, and the pushback I got from my community was horrible. It was, why are you spending your time on this? Aren't there all these good Jewish organizations to devote your time to? To which I responded, well, that's what I've been doing for my entire life, and now I'm just giving 2 days to this other cause, or 3 days. But I guess my question for you is, there has been since October 7th a push in amongst even secular Jews to turn inward rather than outward during this time. And what is your feeling about that?
Yeah, thank you. The first thing is, I think we have to appreciate and acknowledge where it comes from. I understand. I think there's legitimacy to that feeling of vulnerability and the impulse that says, if people were showing up for me in the way that I needed, the world would look very different. So I got to show up for myself, because no one's going to do it for me. We have those voices in our medium-sized tent straddling the center of North American Jewry politically, which is how I think about AJC. And I want those voices in the room, because if we're going to move a community, it actually has to speak to some of the concerns, partially because they come from a real place, partially because there's a difference between encouraging, neutral, skeptical, and just irreconcilably hateful. And I don't think everybody falls into that camp who isn't with me or with us. And if politics is the art of the possible, so is some of this work. That when I'm in a room and someone's so far off from where I am, you have to figure out where are your red lines, where your integrity demands you say something, and how do you do it in a way that may move the person or conversation a degree from where it is. I think the maximalism that says I can only talk to people whose enlightened view of the world is as perfect as mine. Well, me and the 12 others will move to our cave of Qumran, and we'll start our own little community there. But it's not how this really works. So I do think it's very situational. But I think about actually something that a Muslim partner told me. This is Egyptian American Muslim in Dallas who had worked for national security under Obama, but very embedded in Muslim communities. And he loves to talk about something General David Petraeus said about Iraq. And he would instruct his commanders when they went out into villages in Iraq to engage with local populations in a way that maximized the pool of reconcilables and minimized the pool of irreconcilables. It's a very military way of thinking about insurgency and counterinsurgency. But I think the pool of reconcilables is much larger than we see, and the pool of irreconcilables is much smaller than sometimes appears. But that smaller, and this is true on both sides of the hyphen, of the Muslim-Jewish hyphen, but that pool, the small group, definitely has a larger say in shaping social and political orthodoxies. And how we shift the social and political orthodoxies has to do with the amount of social risk we can take, where we do it, doing it smartly. And this is what leadership is, right? If you get out way ahead, you're just a guy taking a walk or a person taking a walk. But how you raise the gas and lower it in the right ways to make change, well, that's really where the challenge is. And I think we're all students in that field.
Okay. Well, we're actually out of time. My question was, we're not going to answer it now. I want to end with that. How does it look from the other side? What's in it for them? And I think that's a question we need to answer for ourselves and to understand it. So next week we're going to talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's a beginning of an answer, because in many cases, I think, Ari, maybe you would agree or disagree, but the Muslim Brotherhood is a problem for Muslims themselves first and foremost, before it's a problem for us. And this is a beginning of maybe a mutual interest with those reconcilables, maybe, and not with part of the Muslim community. So we have 1 minute left. Ari, anything you'd like to? To leave us with?
See this as an invitation to connect. If there's you got to do your due diligence sometimes when you reach out and who your partners are, or if you're thinking about a program or you want to bring voices in for a program, reach out. I think it's a gift that AJC supports not just one. My partner, Natalia Mahmoud, is a Muslim American woman. We have 2 positions that have the words Muslim Jewish in the title, with a credible, principled group. See it as open. And the thing I kind of like to say is I'm a fan of Marvel comics, and I've watched the movies, with the multiverse being a big piece of it, that there are multiple versions of the universe, billions of them. So I know there's a version of the multiverse that goes towards transformation, cooperation, and all the good things we're looking at. And if we want to get there, it doesn't happen on its own. There are things that we need to do and steps we need to take that enable that possibility in the future. And it may be something that we see in the next years. It may be something we see in our lifetime, and it may not be. But there are things, and this is being part of Am Yisrael and a long history and tradition. What is it that's demanded of me with the opportunity that we have been given by our Creator, the guide of all things, to be able to even sit at the table with some people as peers and have this conversation? And that gives me tremendous hope, but it's also an obligation and an expression of hakarat hatov for the time that we live in, even with all of the challenges. All right, be in touch, please.
Thank you so much, Ari. See you next week. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you so much.